Good afternoon and welcome to this ASLEF Women's Committee webinar, Full Steam Ahead, Health, Women's Rights, Sexual Health, Women's Rights and the Fight for Equality. My name is Debbie Ray and I am Chair of the Women's Committee. Today we have a powerhouse of a woman who's a registered general and psychiatric nurse with over 25 years experience, now specialising in sexual health promotion and education. She is completing a PhD at the University of Galway on the activism, and she's happy to admit that she's a big fan of cheese. We're delighted to have her with us today. Please welcome Aoife O'Brien. You can put any questions you may have in the Q&A, and if there is time, Aoife will endeavour to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Debbie. Truly standing on the shoulders of giants, and hopefully I'll live up to that very, very, very flattering introduction. So thanks very much for having me. And I kind of apologise for the rail puns in this, but I figured Full Steam Ahead was a very good title. It felt like a perfect fit because I'm hoping that the people who are in attendance today, that you're the ones and you acknowledge and understand that you literally keep Britain moving. And I wanted to focus today on something that, you know, we as women and indeed as workers in general often leave behind, which is our own well-being. The session today is about sexual health, women's rights and equality, but not about them as separate issues, as part of that one journey, because when people and women, including our trans and non-binary colleagues, when we get together and we have access to good care and safety and respect, you know, everything moves forward and we move stronger collectively. We'll talk briefly about the realities that women face in the workplace and indeed in life, menopause, pregnancy, and access to care, and also how politics and prejudice shape our health outcomes, and more importantly, how they contribute to health inequality. And hopefully we'll celebrate our progress and our solidarity. So full steam ahead and let's get started. So hopefully by the end of this session, all participants will have a better understanding of the importance of sexual health as part of our overall well-being for women and workers. And we'll look briefly at why sexual health matters. We'll understand how shift work affects our sexual health. We'll explore how race, gender and sexuality intersect to shape health inequalities. And maybe when we leave, we'll have a chance to reflect on how we as individuals and indeed as colleagues can move forward and move forward not just in the workplace, but in society as well. So why does sexual health matter? Well, sexual health is part of our biopsychosocial makeup. So it's biological, it's psychological, and it's sociological. It's about empowerment and awareness and prevention and advocacy. It's about taking control of our bodies. And if we can take control of our bodies and we're empowered, then we can take control of our workplaces and our choices. Sexual health is a very fundamental component of our overall health, not just for women, but for all individuals. And we know that the evidence is quite clear that poor sexual health correlates with wider physical, psychological and social consequences. We know in the UK that the evidence shows us that women report much higher levels of poor sexual health than men. And we know that the impact of sexual health extends beyond the individual to workplace productivity, to our communities and their well-being and indeed equality. And by ensuring good sexual health, we make it not just a personal matter, but a matter of rights and equality and social justice. It's okay, I'm fine. And I'm sure pretty much everybody on this call has used those words at some point. The politics of our bodies has always been deeply connected to struggles over power and autonomy and indeed dignity. Decisions about who can access contraception or abortion or gender affirming care or even accurate health information are shaped not just by medicine, but very much by political forces that govern our lives. And we've seen in the UK that rise of the far right and authoritarian movements, and they're increasingly targeting reproductive and trans rights. And that's part of a much broader backlash against equality in general and social justice. And we need to be very mindful of that rhetoric because it devalues women. And when we promote those rigid, hyper masculine norms, it has a very direct and harmful impact on us in the workplace, but especially in male dominated industries, for instance, such as transport. It creates a culture where disrespect is minimized, your complaints are dismissed, and women feel pressure to tolerate behavior that undermines their confidence and their personal safety. And it reinforces the idea that leadership and technical skill and your physical capability, they're all male traits. And it makes it very much more difficult for us to receive fair evaluations in our work lives and also to progress. And when you're entering or working in particularly male dominated sectors, it really does increase that use of language and that weaponizing of language. It increases isolation, and it affects the workplace because there's a reduction in retention. People will leave. And it heightens your emotional burden of trying to navigate a workplace where you're already underrepresented as a woman. And you're therefore feel you have to work harder to prove yourselves, and you're trying to manage that bias and discrimination because it's weaponized against you. And very often, you'll hear that banter piece of, oh, she's hormonal. And that means sometimes that we second guess ourselves, that when we feel we have a legitimate complaint, we're going, well, is it really, or am I just being a bit sensitive? And at that structural level, it also discourages employers from investing in gender equity measures, such as, very inclusive policies, training, or safe reporting mechanisms. Because what it says is, oh, well, it's just women, this is a political issue, oh, it's unnecessary, we treat everybody the same. And it's one of the biggest things that I would hear is we don't need a policy around that because we're an equal opportunities employer. We treat everybody the same. And equality isn't about treating everybody the same, and it's about equity. And sometimes we need different policies in order to have an equal seat at any table. And for trade unionists, it really matters. Sexual and reproductive health is completely a workplace issue. If you can't access safe abortion, fertility treatment, menopause support, or gender affirming healthcare, then you can't participate fully and equally in the workforce. And we know that far right attacks on the LGBTQ communities directly affect those in the workplace. But also those austerity cuts are targeted specifically at migrants and women and those on lower incomes, and it leaves them without being able to access the care they need. And the burden of inadequate healthcare is already falling hardest on those who face inequality, which are working class women, disabled people, Black and migrant communities, and precarious workers. And trade unions have a long, long history of defending rights that go way beyond the factory floor, and protecting bodily autonomy and defending inclusive healthcare and resisting those far right narratives are really essential to building safe and equitable workplaces. And as workers, if we're in control of our own bodies, then we're better able to control our working conditions. And that's really fundamentally a political issue. So, what does sexual health mean? This is moving on to the fun part in a way. It's about respect and safety. It's about positive and respectful approaches with freedom from discrimination. It's about physical health. Very often when we talk about sexual health, people immediately think about ill health, so STIs or unintended pregnancies. It's about our emotional and mental health. And this means being able to enjoy sexual experiences and to have a good self-esteem relating to our sexuality and to experience pleasure in our sexual life and to feel secure in our sexual expression, and to have pleasurable and safe sexual experiences, particularly in the context of non-coercion. And it's something that we're seeing unfortunately rising hugely, is the level of coercive control that's operating in relationships. And that again, in heterosexual relationships is fed by this far right male rhetoric, but it must be acknowledged that it exists in all relationships, same sex or heterosexual. And also, it's a lifespan approach. Our sexual health is relevant throughout your life, from youth to old age. Our sexual health is about, the things that we like, the how we like to be touched, our senses, for babies with soft blankets, or as we get older, the bath, the shaving foam, or shampoo that we use. And particularly for older people in caring institutions, it's very much a case of, if the only human touch somebody has is a clinical touch, for an injection or to wash you or to shave you, then we're missing a huge gap, because as humans, we need contact. And that's why sexual health is really, really embedded in who we are, that sense of security. And if we can get it right at the very, very basic level, it will lead us to have the communication skills to be able to achieve that respect and safety, the emotional and mental health esteem, and to be confident in, expressing our identity and our sexual orientation in a way that fulfills us. A big one is the impact of shift work, and particularly with regards to our disruption with reproductive health and menstrual cycles. So one of the big studies in Canada that was done found that those that work on night shifts, particularly rotating night, have a 28% higher risk of irregular menstrual cycles. When your cycle is irregular, you will usually find that you have increased menstrual pain, dysmenorrhea, and it's that sleep-wake cycle, because your body falls out of it, can't regulate itself. It also affects our fertility. So sleep disruption, it slows down your ovulation rates. You'll produce less luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulation hormones and progesterone. And that can actually decrease your conception, your ability to conceive. We can see here the evidence shows 33% of shift workers experience subfertility. It doesn't mean that they're infertile, but they'll find it more difficult to conceive. And also in pregnancy outcomes, there's an increase of miscarriage and preterm birth and low birth weight. And the Stocker study found there was a 51% higher odds of miscarriage before 20 weeks. And that's also down to your stress-related hormone responses as well. Your circadian rhythm really just means your sleep-wake cycle. It's sort of a big word for just saying that you're not getting as much sleep as you need. And we know traditionally, particularly with women, we tend to sleep less on night shifts because we usually have caregiving responsibilities that we have to work with as well. In terms of the menopause, we know that those in shift work can experience their menopause up to 1.9 years earlier than those who aren't engaged in shift work. And that means that for a lot of women, their mood swings and the hot flushes that they're experiencing, they may not actually recognize as menopause because they feel they're too young. And again, it's back to that "it's okay, I'm fine" issue. Sexual function and libido, we know that fatigue and stress, and you're in a safety critical industry, and work in general can be stressful depending on your employer, but particularly if you're feeling underrepresented and under-supported, can cause a reduction in your sexual desire and satisfaction. And we know that shift workers are 1.5 times more likely to report sexual dysfunction. The other thing that goes part and parcel with that is the prescription of SSRIs, which would be sertraline, Prozac, your fluoxetine. So usually if you present to your GP and you're experiencing stress and fatigue, they'll likely look at giving you an SSRI or a low-grade antidepressant. But in fact, that up to 80% of people will experience sexual dysfunction while on SSRIs, and it's very much something that's not discussed. Particularly in women, it can actually cause an inability to orgasm. Some women will be able to orgasm at some times, but within that 80%, about 30% will lose the ability to achieve an orgasm. And in men, SSRIs can cause a range of erectile issues as well, and ejaculatory issues. Reproductive cancers are related to the restriction on melatonin, which is also produced, when we're rested. It's that wake-sleep cycle. And the IRAC actually classified night shift work as probably carcinogenic to humans. We know there's increased risks in breast, ovarian, and endometrial cancers in long-term shift workers. And it's really something that, we need to be talking to all women and providing education about with regards to shift work. And then there's the psychosocial and relational health. Our shift work interferes with our partner intimacy, our family life, and our social networks. It's quite a high stress, safety critical roles. So it can reduce, or it can result in, depressive symptoms. And of course, if you've got a relationship strain that you and your partner are working opposite shifts, and then you're worried about work, you may be worried about your relationship as well, and that can lead to, a feeling of not being seen as, a sexual person, and also falling into a routine where you are literally ships that pass in the night. So all of these things really, really, really need to be talked about, and they need to have information about them in the workplace. It's really, really important. If we're not feeling good about ourselves, and we're not feeling valued for who we are, and we're not feeling in a healthy and a positive relationship, it will impact on all areas of our life. So supporting pregnant women in the workplace. Very much, I think people will, immediately say, oh, well, we have a pregnancy and work policy. And what they're talking about really is a leave policy. But there are many more supports that pregnant women and people in the workplace need. And we know from Pregnant Then Screwed, which are a great group in Scotland, that about 74,000 women a year maintain that they have lost their jobs or left their jobs simply for being pregnant or for taking leave. And that's about the equivalent of one woman being pushed out of her job every 7 minutes, which is horrific. And then on top of that, as you can see, I will send these slides to Deborah afterwards. Women returning from maternity leave very often find a situation that they have been demoted, or they're being given tasks that, they weren't part of their initial role, or indeed, I guess maybe in terms of working in the rail industry, they may be giving links that are completely incompatible to their role as a new parent. And in fact, 1 in 5 women said that they left their employer because of this. So it's important to do those exit interviews, and for really, really to have that honest conversation with why are you leaving? And that level of discrimination is incredibly devastating for individuals and their families, financially and emotionally. But it also means for employers that they're losing valuable employees. And they can also be, taken to the WRC, and there can be legal implications about it. But it is very difficult for somebody coming back as a new parent and dealing with that, navigating just the new parent life and all that goes with it, to then have to navigate quite a traumatic experience in their work environment as well. We know flexible schedules are needed while pregnant. We know about ergonomic supports that are necessary, and we know extra breaks for fatigue. But again, it's really important that we have that supportive workplace culture, and that means not just educating the individual who's pregnant, but it means educating the entire workforce to create that really supportive structure. So Infertility, as we've said earlier, people on shift work can find it difficult to conceive. And we know that in general, as populations age and choose to have children later on in life, and also same-sex relationships, more and more people are going down the route of fertility treatment. And experiencing difficulties in conceiving is traumatic enough for anybody, as well as trying to manage that in a work environment. They can significantly increase your stress levels and also cause depression. And that's due to not just artificial hormones and medication side effects, but the emotional stress of hope and uncertainty, the financial burdens, and also the social isolation, maybe not being able to talk about it in an open forum or feeling supported, because there is such a level of stigma associated with it. And you'll very often hear about it, in bounce, and particularly when people are newly married, it's absolutely fine for people to start saying, when are you having a kid? When are you having a kid? Or are you shooting blanks? Or what's going on? It's about time you got started. All of those things can be incredibly traumatic for someone who's seeking professional help, and for any couple to hear when they're going through the journey. As you can see, the IVF success rates are also not as high as you would be led to believe, and particularly the older you get, and indeed between 38 and 40, only about 25%, about a quarter, just over a quarter of people who are using or seeking fertility treatment will be successful. And once you get over the age of 40, it's less than 10%. So you're also dealing with that roller coaster. And indeed, maybe when you're in work, you may realize that it hasn't been successful, and it's how you navigate that. It's really important that we have really strong infertility policies and fertility policies in workplaces. And it's not just about the person that's undergoing the treatment, but it's also should extend to their partners. Their partners may want time off to attend clinic appointments, and indeed the partner may want time off should the treatment not be successful, and they've just been informed of it as well. Particularly in safety critical industries and workplaces where you really, really need to be focused. It's really important that you can have those open conversations, and that you're allowed that time off, and that you're allowed that space. And this again is about a supportive work environment. It's not about people getting extra time off. It's being able to have that confidential conversation with your managers and being supported in doing it as well. So the menopause, younger age at menopause, as we saw, has been associated with not just adverse health outcomes, and particularly the reduced rate in conception, but it's also associated with very much menstrual irregular patterns and earlier onset of menopause. It typically occurs between the ages of 45 and 55. And most of the symptoms you will be very familiar with: hot flushes, sleep disturbances, joint pain, vaginal dryness, urinary symptoms, and changes in libido. One of the things that's not really discussed as much in the contents of menopause is incontinence. So we're going to look at it very, very quickly here. And the reason that the reason that incontinence occurs is because the estrogen levels. So when your estrogen levels drop, they cause a thinning of the vaginal and the urethral tissues. They weaken your pelvic floor muscles, but also if you imagine that your bladder is like a balloon, when it thins, it becomes saggy. And lots of people will talk about, doing your pelvic floor exercises and childbirth. This happens in all women when they hit the menopause. And when we talk about it as if it's an ownership of, an issue that only affects women who have birthed children, then it makes women who are experiencing incontinence and urinary distress who haven't birthed children think that, yeah, there's something not quite right. It is simply a very, very hormonal and chemical reaction, and all women, irrespective of whether they have birthed children or not, will experience some form of urinary change. going through the menopause. Obviously, we know if you're carrying extra weight, that will also have an impact on it. And certainly, women who birth children may experience it to a greater degree. But as I said, it's actually the loss of elasticity that causes that leakage as well. Estrogen only HRT can be really, really good, and you can use it as a pessary. You can actually buy some of it. You can buy Gina over the counter, I think. But in terms of HRT, if you're only using estrogen only, you must have had, you have to have had a hysterectomy. And the reason for that is because it will stimulate the uterine lining. So most HRT is dual, it's got progesterone in it as well. So if you're going to use the estrogen, you also need to be on a dual HRT. That's a HRT that has estrogen and progesterone if you haven't had a hysterectomy, because if you stimulate the womb lining, it can increase the chance of developing womb cancer. And the increase in estrogen will help relieve your hot flushes, the night sweats, the vaginal dryness, and also the bone health. And I think the other piece we don't is the lack of sleep with menopause is a huge issue. And more workplaces really need to be aware of, you know, it's not just a case of waking up with the hot flushes. You may well only have 3 hours sleep and you just can't get back asleep, and you may have no hot flushes. It's your body's not able to regulate itself. If you tack that onto shift work, you've already got a disrupted wake sleep cycle. And it just means that you're then caught in a cycle of you're absolutely shattered by the afternoon, you're going to sleep maybe for an hour or 2 hours, and then you can't sleep during the night. So the bladder symptoms, as I've said, they become more likely, A, as you get older, and B, as the estrogen levels drop. It's less likely that you'll experience this in perimenopause, which usually occurs about 2 to 3 years before your menopause. We say that the average age for menopause is about 51, but we do know that women are starting to menstruate earlier. So we think now that the menopause age is actually starting earlier. There's a lot of evidence being examining that at the moment, and it seems to be kind of from 45 onwards, really, women are becoming more likely to be perimenopausal. I would say in the context of bladder issues, it's really important to see a GP if you're passing urine more frequently and you've got like an increased thirst. That can be indicative of diabetes. If you've got unintentional weight loss, or if you've pain when passing urine, or if you've pain in your abdomen or back, not everything is the menopause, and it's back to the it's okay, I'm fine. You know your body. If there's something happening that you're not sure about, it's really important that you speak to a health practitioner, be it your practice nurse or your GP. And it's also really important that we have this information freely available in workplaces, because not everybody has the space and the support or the experience to explain issues like this. So you can just see from the diagram that where the elasticity decreases. So as I'm looking at it, on the right, you can see would be a woman who's menopausal. And you can see the vaginal lining is much thinner, and it also makes it much drier. But also the vaginal canal will shrink, so it becomes shorter. So coupled with the dryness and the low libido. So when we produce cervical mucus or cervical discharge or arousal discharge, either prior to an orgasm or after we have an orgasm, it contains estrogen, and estrogen makes the vaginal elasticity increase, and it keeps everything lubricated. And also, if you see the shortening of the vaginal canal, it can mean that penetration, whether it's digital, whether it's with a toy, whether it's with a penis, it can make it uncomfortable. And it's because literally the vagina has shortened. So you will touch the top of the cervix, and also the skin won't stretch as much. Lube is your friend. Use it as often as you need to. Try it by yourself. And also remember, lube isn't just for internal. So the skin at the bottom near your perineum, that gap between your vagina and your anus, that needs to be lubed as well, because all of that is no longer getting the estrogen that it would have done prior to you being menopausal. And vaginal estrogens can also help vaginal irritation and painful sex. But I would always recommend, if you're not comfortable about using vaginal estrogens, or it's just you're perimenopausal and things aren't as lubricated as they were, or you're not achieving orgasm as often, or you're not feeling as aroused, then use lube. It will help hugely, and it will stop you getting those little tears. And be able to communicate that, be able to communicate with your partner that it's not comfortable and that you may wish to try something else. And often they may require reassurance that it's not them. You're still very attracted to them. You still fancy them. It is literally your body is just not working as it did prior to perimenopause and menopause. Hip and joint pain. Very often women will know all about hot flushes and they'll know about vaginal dryness. Hip and joint pain. Menopausal arthralgia is one of the most common symptoms, and women don't seem to associate it in general with the menopause. It affects way over half of women. It'll be pains in your knees and particularly in your hips. You'll find limping, you won't even realize you're doing it. And you'll be really stiff. And people say, oh, I just suddenly got older, literally overnight, and it's actually part and parcel of the menopause. And it's also down to that declining estrogen, because there's estrogen in our connective tissue. So then the tissue contracts, and then once the tissue contracts, we can't bend. Also, estrogen has huge anti-inflammatory properties to it. So when we don't produce estrogen, we're more likely to become inflamed, and you'll see it there in the joints, bursitis, particularly in the hip. You'll get a pain on the outside of your hip, and it'll worsen with movement. And the same thing in your glutes. And again, that will be the hip, but it will become worse standing and sitting, which obviously if you're, climbing in and out of cabs or on locos or on trains or just in your everyday life is not ideal. Osteoarthritis and osteoporosis. DEXA scans are great. They will identify if you've got a low bone density. They're not recommended for women until they're over the age of 65. However, if you're 50 and you've got hypothyroidism, or you may have had a fracture, or you have rheumatoid arthritis, or you've been on steroids, corticosteroids in particular, then you do meet the requirements for a DEXA scan. And a DEXA scan will show for your osteopenia, which is really important. It's that part just before you get osteoporosis. And if you're identified as being osteopenic, you can take supplemental calcium. I would recommend all women do it anyway, and it may well stop you falling into that osteoporotic category. So certainly if you're concerned, or if you have a history of any of those things I've just mentioned, do speak to your GP and ask for a DEXA scan. They're very unobtrusive, they're very quick, and they're actually quite cheap. They're far cheaper for healthcare professionals to be providing than fixing broken hips and long-term osteoporosis issues. Menopause and work. Oh, sorry, we're flying ahead. Menopause and work. So changes in your hormones can impact on your mental health as well as your physical health. You can experience feelings of anxiety, stress, and even depression. Menopausal women are the fastest growing demographic in the workforce. And this is because for years, women didn't work in Western society. They stayed at home and they raised the children, and now they're working, and they're staying working till much later. They're not leaving when they have children. The British Menopausal Society found that 45% of women felt their menopausal symptoms have had a negative impact on their work, and 47% needed to take a day off work due to the menopause symptoms. but that they wouldn't tell their employer the real reason. And again, that's back to the piece about us not feeling safe and supported in our workplace, and particularly in male-dominated workplaces, because it's just seen as, you know, oh, she's got period pain, she's not in. Oh, she's got menopause, she's not in. Oh, I wish I could take time off. Yeah, if you haven't slept all night, the last place that anybody needs to be is in a safety critical role. And many women have often said they find managing their menopause symptoms in the workplace challenging. And that's because many women find it difficult to talk about their menopause at work because they don't feel supported and because it's not language that we're using. So really the menopause needs to be treated as everyone's business. There needs to be training on it, and not just for the women in the workplace. All employees need to be receiving training on the menopause and what it is and how it impacts. So, looking briefly at health inequalities, we know neurodivergent people are more likely to develop postnatal depression than neurotypical people. We know autism and ADHD is massively underdiagnosed in females, and indeed, we're looking at a way of researching the menopause experience for neurodivergent people. There is a piece of research that actually states that a lot of women only seek out a neurodivergent diagnosis when they go through the menopause because they're struggling so much with it that they begin to realize that there's something else going on, not just the menopause. And we do know neurodivergent women are more at risk of suffering increased menopausal symptoms. And are less likely to report it. And neurodiverse people are disproportionately more likely to suffer from menstrual problems such as severe PMS and premenstrual dysphoric disorder. There's some really good information on the Jersey Mind website about it, but it's, as you can see, it's clearly an area that we need more research in, and we certainly need to be looking at our workplace policies if we're bringing in neurodivergent policies. Also, what does neurodivergency and reproductive health and menstrual health and menopause health look like? In terms of that intersectional piece and ethnicity and disability, we know that women from Caribbean and African backgrounds are far more likely to only be diagnosed at stage 3 or 4 for reproductive cancers compared with white British women. And it's absolutely shocking that that's the case. Quite a lot of it would appear to be that their levels of pain, there's a thinking amongst health professionals that their pain isn't as severe or as worthy of treatment, so they tend to get brushed off for longer. And for uterine cancer specifically, Caribbean and African women are more than twice as likely to have a late stage diagnosis. And these are all preventable cancers. These are all preventable and treatable cancers. Uterine and womb cancers, about 3,000 women a year in the UK. There's about 10,000 cases. And ovarian cancers and cervical cancers can be anywhere upwards of 30,000 cases. And again, these are preventable. It's back to that health inequalities. We know with disability, women with disabilities are far more likely to have cancers detected at more advanced stages compared to the general population, particularly breast cancer in women with learning disability. And a lot of that is thought to be that because they're not viewed as sexual beings, they're not actually encouraged to have preventative screening until they fall under sort of the national screening plan, when in fact we know that all women should be checking their breasts from, you know, teenage years, and that genuinely women with learning difficulties and intellectual disabilities are left until they, you know, hit the age for public screening. In obstetric care, we know that Bangladeshi women are 24% less likely to receive an epidural, and Black and Caribbean British women are 8% less likely than white women. We would say it was a case of they don't request it. However, there was a survey from the clinical guidelines, NICE clinical guidelines, and found that actually a quarter of Black and mixed heritage women reported being denied requested relief in labour. There's also a very good study on migrant women's experience of gynecological and obstetric care that shows huge disparities in maternity care, their access to it and the responsiveness of clinicians to it. Diagnostic delays we've looked at briefly. and screening and uptake and disability. In Northern Ireland, women with chronic disabilities are 7% less likely to attend breast cancer screening compared with their non-disabled peers. And we know adults with learning disabilities in the UK are 3 times more likely to die from cancer, including female and genital organ cancers. And that would strongly suggest to us that later diagnosis has occurred and they're experiencing barriers to timely care. I suppose my hypothesis would be that people with learning difficulties are desexualized, and there is an understanding that you only need cervical screening if you're having sex. That's not the case. All women should have regular screenings throughout their lives, and again, also if they notice a change in their menstrual patterns. It's also, my hypothesis would be that for people with profound learning and intellectual disabilities, they tend to be prescribed contraceptions and anti-hypersexuality medication. And that means that they can have no cycle or a very irregular cycle. So their carers, if there's a turnover of carers, don't actually recognize when women are having breakthrough bleeding or irregular bleeding. So they're not being identified as this is a clinical issue, we need an intervention, because people just carry on until they realize that they're, much later stage diagnosis of cancer. So politics, workplace culture, and policy. All 3 of these plays a crucial role in women's rights. Our political decisions determine what we fund, how we fund it, who has access to it, and legal protections. If the government restricts services or fail to invest, it's the women who are impacted by it and also impacted by their ability to work safely and with dignity. The workplace culture has a huge influence. Environments that normalize long hours, lack flexibility, or stigmatize menstruation, pregnancy, menopause, or chronic conditions can worsen health outcomes, and they will silence workers who need help and support. And a culture that encourages openness and provides practical accommodations, conversely, so like flexible scheduling, reasonable adjustments, and comprehensive leave policies, will protect women's well-being. And the thing that connects these 2 forces is policy. Strong workforce policies on maternal health, menopause, reproductive health, and anti-harassment policies will create safer conditions, and they will reduce inequalities and enable women to fully participate in the workforce. And we need to be very, very careful when we talk about how far we have come. And as women, we stand on the shoulders of giants and marching for our rights. But all our rights are usually they've been enacted through legislation. And unfortunately, it is very patriarchal structures that enact that legislation. And we need to be very aware of the fact that that can be revoked as quickly by those same patriarchal structures. If we truly want equality, and we can talk about whether we have equality and 3rd wave feminism, and all women must have equality, and that means all our sisters, throughout the world, irrespective of where they are. As long as women are talked about on the most fundamental basic level, if a woman is judged differently for being drunk than a man is, if a woman is judged differently for dressing a certain way than a man is, if a woman is judged differently for having sexual partners than a man is, then we do not have equality. And as women in the workplace, we need to acknowledge that it's not called a struggle for no reason. We still have a struggle, we still have a fight, and that all those rights that we have that are hard won by and hard fought for are enacted by patriarchal institutions, and policies are signed off at a high level in our workplaces. And until we are at the table and we're the ones who are signing those things, those legislations and those rights into our daily living, then we still have a struggle to go. But together, the politics, culture, and policy will shape the realities of all women's health rights, both in the workplace, in society, and in our community as a whole. And thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Aoife. That was brilliant. Thank you. We have some questions for you if you've got the time.
Oh, I've got the time if you've got.
Right. So, from an anonymous attendee, they're currently working an early week, late week roster. Do
Yeah,
you think that extending that to a fortnightly shift pattern would reduce symptoms of being a woman on the railway?
would reduce symptoms of being a woman.
Well, will reduce the symptoms of stroke being a woman on the railway.
Oh, right. So what we would say about shift rostering is, and it's a bit doom and gloom when you see it presented like that. Shift rostering is absolutely fine. We just need to do it in a way that it is regulated. So what we would say is if it's consistently, if your roster is consistent, and you know when you're coming off and you've got your proper rest breaks in between, it's this chopping and changing. That's if you, every 2 weeks it's changing. So I would say if they're doing an early week, late week, and that is going to run for 6 weeks, that's absolutely fine because your body can adjust to it. The early week, late week, fortnightly is better again because it will take your body, as we all know, it takes us 3 or 4 days to get into that routine of actually sleeping. But I suppose the balance is trying to find really is to have something it's regularly rostered rather than, oh, women can't do shift work because as we know, we do loads of shift work. So I guess the answer to the question would be yes, ideally, I would be suggesting a 2 week on, 2 week off situation. Um, is it going to happen in the workplace? It would certainly help regulate your circadian rhythm.
Well, that's something to ask company councils.
This is where we need to be going. And that's why I hope there's some men on the call as well, because as I said, it's about educating the entire workforce. We need to, women keep banging on the doors of the castles, and we need to start building our own castles, and the men need to start knocking on our doors.
How can we encourage companies to properly train their managers on women's health, like menopause, pregnancy, risk assessments, etc., instead of just reading a policy that they may have in their archives?
One of the right. So if you're managing a workforce, you should receive training, and all managers should receive mandatory training, and this very much reproductive health and mental health should be part of their managing of all training. Um, Certainly what I would suggest I guess at local level is when you're dealing, unfortunately, would be for the company council and the reps to come behind a training event and to actually go and deliver training to the managers.
Actually, do you have any tips for keeping hormones stable with shift workers or herbal natural options for those not wanting HRT?
Yeah, so omega-3s are great. And I would suggest that everybody takes omega-3s. Any omega-3s, your fatty acids. And we would also say if we look at what we call not inflammatory markers with foods, so avoid very high fat foods and avoid very rich foods and also foods high in sugar. Sugar spikes cause cortisone levels to increase, which will cause inflammation. It's just our body's natural response cycle as well. But omega-3s, um, yeah, just you'll get them pretty much anywhere. And also vitamin D.
Okay, thank you. With the hip and joint pain in menopause, are over-the-counter supplements like collagen worth spending money on, or are they just over-advertised Facebook hype?
I'm always sort of remiss. I I know some women who have found the over-the-counters, even in primrose oil, very, very beneficial. I think if you're getting to the stage where you're limping, and it's causing you extreme difficulty in your activities of daily life, then you need to look at probably estrogen gels. You need to be talking to your GP about it. The problem with it is that we'll overcompensate for ourselves. We're very adaptable as women, so we'll put up with the pain, but then we'll then change our posture and how we walk, which will lead to back pain. It can lead to shoulder pain and musculoskeletal issues, particularly for women who are working in the rail industry. I guess you're also bouncing around a lot despite ergonomics, so it's not helping. So I would suggest if it's that extreme that it's causing you discomfort, the over-the-counter remedies are unlikely to make a significant difference.
Thank you. This has been very informative. Thank you.
Oh,
I believe an issue is that occupational health in the workplace of a train driver is that they don't understand truly what is expected of us. And some of the issues that you've mentioned for me recently, osteoarthritis, and we aren't always being given the best guidance or advice. How can we best educate this department to being able to help us?
and I'm really sorry to hear that you're struggling. And osteoarthritis and the menopause are huge issues. And I can't imagine it must be awful to go to Occy Health because they're supposed to be the ones who are going to provide us with support, and they just don't get it. And it's also down to that piece, I think, of like, oh yeah, the menopause, just get on with it. Everything's an issue. I really think it's got to be about education, and I think really it's got to come from, you know, within. I think we need to be insisting, and we need to be insisting with managers if they want to increase women in the workplace. They're terrified that they're going to get sued. They're terrified they're going to end up for discrimination, whatever. And sometimes maybe we need to play that card as well. But we need to be telling them they have to come. There's an expectation for them to come. And you need to pull your menopause policy, whatever that looks like. And if your menopause policy isn't clearly identifying issues such as osteoarthritis or your hip pain or whatever, and your referral mechanisms to Occy Health, well, then that's, it's a way of getting them back in. Sometimes we have to shake the stick at them as well. They don't want you off sick. It's in their best interests for Occy Health to provide you with the supports that you need. They certainly don't want a discrimination case against them.
Thank you. Okay, another one from Julie. Is it true that there is a blood test that's coming in next year as an alternative to the smear test?
Right. Okay. There kind of is and there isn't, Julie. So the answer to that is, as usual, women's health is very underfunded. They have identified the PSA test, which is going to be for men. So it will detect, it's going to be a finger prick test they can do at home, and it will give an indication as whether they're inclined to have prostate cancers. The thinking is they're working on one for women, and it will simply detect whether your markers are up or not. It won't say that you don't need a smear test. What it may say is that you should go for a smear test slightly earlier. There might be an indication. So basically, if you're a little bit concerned, you can do it. This is the plan. If it shows that your markers are slightly elevated, you'll be advised to go and get your smear test, which is still the gold standard for identifying precancerous cells and cancerous cells. And if it shows the markers are fine, well, then you won't go. So it kind of isn't. It's not going to replace it. Breakthrough bleeding, we know the amount of people that get, results back that are incorrectly read, or by the time they get the results back, it may have progressed. I would still recommend, uncomfortable and all as it is, and it isn't pleasant, smear test, smear test, smear test.
Thank you. I'm considering writing a motion around cab design in terms of moving away from the 5th to the 95th percentile male norm. Do you think this is a worthwhile route to pursue?
I know very little about cab ergonomics, but I think anything that moves away from a male norm when there are women needs to be, and we know, I can't remember her name, or the crash test dummies, how everything is designed for male body shape. So I say, yeah, go for it, Steve. And well done, you. Brilliant.
And that's it. That's all the questions for you, Aoife.
Well,
So
thanks so
really,
much for having me.
no worries. So thanks so much for joining us today. Big thank you from all of us for such an engaging and insightful session. We've hoped it sparked some new ideas and conversations for you people listening. If you'd like to stay connected or learn more about Aoife's work, You can either contact one of the WRC members who will then pass your questions on to Aoife. Aoife, do you have a website or anything where people can contact you?
No, I don't. You can give them my email address and I'll be more than happy. Anybody can, and as I said, all these things, Debbie, we could easily do an hour on the menopause. We could easily do an hour on sexual activity and enjoyment and intimacy and, cancer. So if there's ever anything that, I can do, please shout, if there's any information. And the common thread from people seems to be, how can we get, workplace on side? It's a good, you know this, Debbie, it's good, strong, local level, female representations at company council, at local level. And where you can't get your foot on the table, find your allies in the men and get them to put it on the table.
Oh, actually, we've got another couple of questions. I'm just typing a private message to Tracy because she says she's tried numerous times
Okay.
and she's even reached out to local reps. No thing. And from Kat, thank you, really informative.
Oh, thanks, Kat.
Okay. Well, thank you, Aoife. That has been great.
Have a good
And thank
one.
you,
Take
everybody,
care
for attending.
and
Thank
have a lovely
you.
weekend.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.